Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbach.
Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited because we're going to have a great discussion about really, something that is, I think, globally, not just a topic, but a movement. Actually, it even in the book, and we'll talk about this in a second, it talks about a movement, but is it really a movement, or is it really a way forward globally? When we start talking about just, businesses, no. We don't talk just about businesses. It's an impact for everybody. And so to share with us some insights in regards to compassionate leadership, today we have Donato J. Trumato. Okay, and he was born and raised in Dunkirk, New York, with a twin brother, 3 older brothers, and an older sister, and a younger brother. His older brother lost his life tragically in a car accident at the age of 23, and his younger brother died at birth. He was raised in a very close family and was raised Catholic, with strong ties to his Italian heritage. 4 years after his older brother died, his sister-in-law lost her life tragically in childbirth. The loss of his hearing at age 8 brought forth 10 years of limited hearing and a severe speech impediment. That, coupled with the death of his sister-in-law due to a medication error during childbirth, motivated him to pursue a professional career in healthcare as a gateway to help fix the fragmented healthcare system. His parents taught him the value of working hard, and regardless of what you have acquired in life, one must give back. A philosophy that has stayed with him throughout his personal and professional life. Additionally, despite all of the pain and suffering his parents experienced in the loss of children, they were always optimistic and compassionate towards others, which is a trait he also inherited from them. He started his professional career by first studying for the Roman Catholic priesthood. His 7 years in the seminary taught him a lot about treating people with kindness and continually developing sustainable relationships. In 1982, he applied for his first healthcare position as a salesman, and the hiring manager looked at him and said, "Why should I hire you? You've never sold anything." And to which he responded, "You're incorrect about that. I sold God for 7 years, and that was not easy." He was hired on the spot and spent nearly 10 years in the pharmaceutical industry before transitioning to home health care to learn more about the health services sector. In 1998, he became an entrepreneur and started his first company focused on disease management, selling the company in 2002. He then joined United Healthcare Group as CEO of one of their business units, and it was where he learned everything about healthcare, prompting him to launch his second company in 2008. Focused on providing information to medical doctors and nurses via mobile devices to address the medication errors that took the life of his sister-in-law. He also sold the company to Merck in 2013. In 2015, after having been chairman of the board of Healthways, he became CEO of his first public company. 6 months later, he orchestrated the sale of one of the sub-performing divisions, whereby his company paid the acquiring company $25 million to take the division. It was deemed one of the most creative transactions, and because of the sale, nearly $1 billion valuation was immediately created for the company. In 2020, he retired to devote his time to his 2 not-for-profit organizations, Tramuto Porter Foundation and Health E-Villages, and to use the time to write the double bottom line, how compassionate leaders captivate hearts and deliver results. His legacy is compassion, where empathy and action are at the center of his leadership philosophy. This is exemplified when in 2010, he was reading an article that indicated in our lifetime, 1 billion people will go to their graves prematurely because they have no access to a healthcare worker. 6 million children will die each year because they have no access to clean water, medications, or a healthcare worker. Rather than just show empathy, he launched the Health E-Villages organization to address the many challenges associated with healthcare access. He and his partner spent equal time living in Florence, Italy, St. Petersburg, Florida, Florida, and Ogunquit, Maine. Donato J. Trumato, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
I am. Thank you very much for that very thoughtful introduction.
Well, I mean, and so for me, getting the opportunity to review this book, learn more about your background, I mean, things just come more to life, as a result. But what it does, it asks me or presses the question when you say in the title, double bottom line. What does double bottom line really mean?
Yeah, and I think that it's a great question. I think there's been, certainly the triple bottom line and the double bottom line. For me, what the double bottom line has always meant is that, listen, you have to be profitable. I have run companies my entire life, and so that is a given. However, it's not a but. You can have an and you can be an organization that does good, that puts a soul in the company. And so we try to really dispel this notion that it's one or the other. And that's why I thought it was a great title, The Double Bottom Line, How Compassionate Leaders Captivate Hearts and Deliver Results.
Okay. So we talk about all kinds of leadership, servant leadership, situational leadership. I mean, we talk about all different, versions and variations. There are times where we have to do something different and it is compassionate, but may seem or appear to be stern because maybe we're in a moment of chaos. I mean, there's all kinds of different, variations. But when you're talking about compassionate leadership, can you explain in your words what compassionate leadership really means?
Absolutely, and very simple, because as you know, we interviewed nearly 40 world leaders. And so I want to be careful that this definition isn't the definition according to Donato. This definition was extracted by our conducting hundreds of hours of interviews of these 40 leaders, but it was also, matched against our surveying 1,500 U.S. workers who were asked about leadership in their respective workplace. So here's the definition. Compassionate leadership is empathy. You have to have empathy in action. You can't have one or the other. If you, make a decision and you do something without understanding the pain, then, you go around with a pooper scooper because you've made some mistakes. So it's empathy, it's understanding, taking the time to understand the pain and then taking action. So case in point, I could be on the street and I, see somebody who might be in a wheelchair and, you recognize that they're in pain because they don't have enough resources for food. And I could say, I feel bad, and then continue to walk on. Or I can take the compassionate leadership side and say, I understand now what you're going through, and I'm going to do something about it. Thank you for how you provided the narrative about healthy villages. I think that's a great example of how many people said to me, Donato, it's not our problem that 1 billion people are going to go to their graves. And I said, you got to be kidding me. Just because you are born in a zip code that doesn't have resources, does that make it okay for someone not to have access to healthcare? And I didn't sit back. I launched the Healthy Villages organization. And we found that as a common denominator among all 40 of the people we interviewed. They did something.
Well, you mentioned empathy, and that oftentimes can get thrown around quite a bit. However, in the book, you talk about empathy not being enough. So what do you mean by empathy not being enough? Because you were talking about how important empathy is.
Well, I think it would be absolutely incorrect if I did not refer to our current crisis in Ukraine. What we covered in our research is when a leader lacks empathy, they lose the ability to adapt their approach because they can't see further than their own point of view. And being able to adapt means you can make better judgment calls and tailor your approach. And so empathy, you have to have empathy. You have to understand what people are going through. Quite honestly, the bombing of the Children's Hospital in Ukraine was absolutely a violation of human rights and showed no empathy. And if the leadership there could have understood what that meant, you had pregnant women, you had children who should have felt safe. And so when you don't have empathy, your point of view is clouded and you can't adapt your approach. And so we found that in the book that empathy, yes, It's important because it helps you to understand what the other person is going through, and then to make rational decisions about what should I do to correct this in a way that doesn't harm these people further.
Okay, so then as you're talking, compassion, empathy, action, all those things that are needed, and we're going to talk about, you mentioning something that how we have to flip the model. But before we get into that, you mentioned something in the book about different myths associated with this, and I would dare to say, even now that you've explained some of the things, there's still some of these myths that are sitting out there that people saying, yeah, but, right. So if you could explain some of these common myths.
Well, so the one myth is that, being compassionate is, the same as being nice, compassionate leadership. And that's what I meant about, you could identify the pain that somebody is going through. That's being nice, but then you don't do anything about it. The compassionate leadership model takes it to a whole new level. That's myth number one. Myth number two, and I was accused of this my whole life, when I would say, I'm a compassionate leader, they would say, oh, that's really, weak leadership, Donato. That's not strong. Yet that is not correct, because there are 3 T's to compassionate leadership. The first is tenderness, taking the time to get to know the person. And I'll give you some examples later, but to explain what the answer here I think is important. The first T is to have the tenderness, to take the time to understand the why of someone. The second is you get the trust. So the second T is, once you had the opportunity to get to know the person, to get to understand what their value systems are, you get the trust. And then the third T is you can be tenacious. I never had a challenge or a difficult time terminating somebody who wasn't performing, but I did it in a way that had associated my tenacity with trust and with knowing the person in terms of their values. And so when I had to terminate somebody, there was never a controversy. I had so many of my colleagues who would say, the one thing I don't like doing in my job is firing people. And I would challenge them to say, you're afraid of that because you haven't gotten to know the person. And I could sit down with the individual and say, listen, I know enough about you that you have skills that quite honestly are going to be better in a position that we just don't have in this company. And I want to be able to make this transition one that is good for you and for the company. I never had this fear of going into a conversation like that. So, when you say that compassionate leadership is weak leadership, people think you can't make the tough decisions. Quite to the contrary, you can make the tough decisions, but you're doing it in a way that has gained the trust. In fact, one notion in the book that I have proposed, you remember the old saying, culture eats strategy for lunch? Throw that out the window. Trust eats strategy and culture for lunch. If you don't have the trust, you can't establish a culture, you can't establish a strategy. And it takes time. Trying to get the trust doesn't happen overnight. You have to really apply. You mentioned about when I sold the division, I actually paid for someone to take the division. Do you realize, as a CEO of a public company, I was being pressured by the outside analysts and the market to make the decision quickly. And I said, no. What I did is I sat down with over 2,000 employees over a 6-month time period. I listened to their concerns. I wanted to understand, maybe they had a recommendation that I had not considered. When I made that decision and 2,000 employees moved to the other company, we did not have, and I repeat, we did not have one chaotic mess. Everyone had been involved in that decision, and we made the decision based on the input that came in. I had gained the trust from the employees, and then I was tenacious that I had to do the right thing for the shareholders.
Okay, so that kind of brings me, and you're hitting this. You're talking about, trading, a publicly traded, privately held, talking about analysts. You have quarterly calls. If it's publicly traded, you have to make. You have reports that you have to create for shareholders. I mean, all these things. If you've got investment firms, you have to be able to address their needs and wants. Heck, they're probably board members for you. You got all this complexity. So I start thinking about, well, heck, what do KPIs, key performance indicators, and metrics, how does that undermine what you're talking about here?
Well, I don't think that, remember, it's called the double bottom line. It's not, you captivate hearts and don't deliver profits. And by the way, when I made that decision, while it took some time, we added $1 billion of value to the company. The stock went from $9 to $25 overnight. And so it's not a question that you forget about the important aspects of this whole notion of profitability. By the way, look at, the great resignation here today. Look what's happening. There are more jobs right now out there, yet we can't fill them. And so the question really is, are workers quitting over company values? Are they quitting over, the salary? And, the answer is yes to both, is that I think the employees are realizing right now that they have choices. And you're going to find now a significant group of people that are going to match their values with the value of the company. So it does have enormous benefit to shareholder value. It has enormous benefit to your brand value, that when you start to explore, look what's happened in Russia. I applaud the 120 plus companies that have made a decision to say we are not going to do business in a country that violates human rights. And so it's entirely different from when I started 45 years ago, is that the younger employees, the middle-aged employees, and by the way, there are so many senior leaders that have left the workforce that have now indicated that if they were to go back, they would be changing things to align more with the compassionate leadership model that we talk about in the book. So it does have value for the shareholders. It does have value in terms of how you create a company that can perform with high productivity.
Well, as you're talking, and so I want to actually look through things from somewhat of a different lens. All right, so now oftentimes I talk about an organizational, and it's kind of it may seem kind of vulgar or gross, but I think it serves the point. I talk about an organizational decapitation, meaning I'm sitting here at the sea level, and I have all these aspirations. I have this vision, this mission, this purpose. I have this commitment to compassionate leadership and all that. And so, yes, you're dealing with a certain level of type of metrics and valuations and analysts and things like that. But when it starts filtering through the organization and you start going through these middle layers and who are responsible for making sure that things are executed properly, processes and procedures and so on and so forth, I'm looking at productivity, I'm looking at performance, and it gets all the way down to that front line. So by the time it goes through all of these different layers, the message is quite different. And so I see a disconnection. The top of the organization says, hey, we're going this way. And the rest of it, by the time you go through all those filters, is saying, what you're saying and what you're putting on the wall is not what's happening in the hall.
It's a great call out. And so I mentioned about this survey that we had done, the 1,500 US workers. They were asked about leadership and culture in their workplace. Senior leaders' responses were compared against those of middle managers and entry-level employees. And this survey revealed a serious disconnect between how workers see their leaders and how leaders see themselves. And here are a few examples. One of the questions we asked is, leaders identify as compassionate, workers disagree. The respondents were asked if they agreed with the following, quote, leaders in my organization inspire others to be compassionate in their work and personal lives. 86% of senior leaders said they agreed. Only 65% of the lowest level employees agreed. And in striking contrast to leaders' self-perception, 60% of all workers said the beliefs and attitudes held by leaders are insufficient in promoting compassion. So I'm not going to go through all the survey questions, but there is one. And so what do you do? The answer is, what do you do? Let me give you an example. About 2 years into my tenure as CEO of a public company, remember, you talked about my hearing loss, and I'm very conscious about bullying. In fact, our foundation just has launched a national workplace dignity program. I'm very conscious of bullying. And I was thinking that in the workplace, I'm wondering if, despite my message that we will not tolerate bullying in the workforce, is it really happening? So we did a survey. I was shocked. Nearly 25% of my workers to whom I, at the highest level of the organization, said we will not tolerate this. We had tons of training programs for, the executives. 1 in 4 indicated that they had been bullied. And then I went one step further. I gave my cell phone out to everyone. I said, call me and discuss this with me. And as they were doing this, it hit me that being able to talk about it is not enough. Being able to have training programs is not enough. You have to, Yogi Berra once said, you don't want to make the wrong mistake. And I think the mistake we make in organizations is we rely on training programs. We rely on what the executives might say in the executive boardroom. You have got to be a little bit more diligent. And it's no longer walk around, this whole notion, walk around the building and you're going to get things done. You have to seek out people. And that's what I did. And by the way, we started to do things that really started to lower that ratio of 1 out of 4. For example, every week we had a Ask Me Anything call. I wanted my leaders to know that we should never be afraid of an employee coming into a call and asking any question. So you've got to be the role model. It doesn't happen overnight. My last point is, I do not believe that leaders wake up in the morning and they say, today is the day that I'm going to act like an idiot. I don't think that happens. We bring biases to our workforce. We bring biases into our homes. And so it is in our hands to address that up front and to be able to educate and help each leader understand what biases are they bringing to the workforce. Some of those biases might be I'm the chief executive officer and everybody has to listen to what I'm saying. That's the way I was brought up. And so it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. And the good thing about this book is after each chapter, we have exercises. We have, worksheets that they can work through and begin to identify how they can change their leadership approach.
Yeah, I think you hit on a really important point is, as far as, how do I apply it? How do I change behavior? Because a lot of that's really what we're talking about. It's, becoming aware, and then therefore making the changes. And one of the things that we had talked about prior to recording is, and it's kind of gets into what you referred to a second ago in the role modeling, right? And you talked about, leaders. And it really doesn't matter what level of the organization. It could be frontline leader, all the way up to, executive leader, is that they're really bad in regards to self-compassion. And if you're not modeling it in that particular way, how do you expect other people to model it for themselves and then they're for others, right?
Well, one of the biggest mistakes I made, and I think that is a sign of a leader, is to be able to admit your mistakes. And one of the mistakes I made, and I have just come to the recognition because I retired last year, and now I have the ability to see what I might have been missing because I was devoting too much time to work. And you must show yourself compassion. One of the questions that I think stumped the 40 leaders that we interviewed is when I asked them, it was the last question, how do you show yourself compassion? And it was very interesting, to watch, and we videotaped each one of the interviews, that they were stumped. They didn't know what I meant by it. And then when they started to answer it, you could tell that they were not comfortable in, expressing that they should have taken more time for themselves. I do think after they left the interview, they realized that you can't be compassionate in the workplace if you yourself don't establish as a role model. I'll share with you a very interesting story. I was never eager to share with the organization that I am a gay man. And for years, I kept it to myself. And the organization, didn't know about my personal life. They didn't know that I, did have an outlet to have some fun. Until in 2014, I was awarded the Robert F. Kennedy Ripple of Hope Human Rights Award. I was before 2,000 people. We had politicians, we had CEOs. And normally I would not have introduced my partner. I would have kept it a secret. And I got up there and I said to myself, 500 of my employees are here tonight. I'm receiving a Human Rights Award. And I am going to be embarrassed about sharing my life, a person who I've been with for 25 years. When I made that announcement, I had a standing ovation. In fact, there's a little humor to it. One of my employees came up and said, "I'm so happy you expressed that. It makes you less boring now." Um, but they were able now to see me in a different light. And that was a wake-up call of I wasn't showing myself compassion. I wasn't realizing that people don't care about, and if they do and they take it the wrong way, it's not your problem. It's something they have to work out. And that one decision I made changed my approach to how I had deeper relationships with the employees in the company. I was now one of them. And so part of that compassion to yourself is recognizing that you have to be human. You should reveal to the organization your own pain and suffering, because when you try to extract it out of them, it becomes more real. It becomes more of a compassionate partnership.
I mean, I would dare to say that, and what people don't see is that you talked about the whole trust component, is you start gaining trust when people also find connections with you, right?
You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. I can't begin to express, when I went to the office the next week, how many people just stopped me in the hallway and, shook my hand, or, gave. The relationship had changed. But now keep in mind, I was, in business for, 41 years. 36 of those years, I kept that, separate. And so I think that when you do that, you are not role modeling what you want from the organization. And what you want is trust, and you want people to feel safe in the organization. And that's what I think is happening with this great resignation. People don't feel safe anymore. They don't see their leaders, the feet matching what they're saying. And I think that we have a quintessential opportunity to change that.
There you go. No more decapitations. Okay, so there's a lot of stories that you have shared within the book, and for me, I would dare to say that there's probably one or two that are kind of standouts for you in regards to being insightful and impactful. Which one can you share to listeners that just is really kind of a standout for you?
Actually, the one is from a 17-year-old young lad. We interviewed celebrities. We interviewed, Fortune 100 CEOs, but we also interviewed a 17-year-old young man, Jordan Mittler, who during the COVID pandemic, his grandmother did not know how to use social media, and she was suffering from loneliness. As you know, loneliness has been now a significant issue in our society. And so he came up with this idea. What if I took the time to train her on how to turn the device on, and how to navigate into Facebook? And his grandmother, with a few lessons, became a user of social media. And he had the idea, why don't I take this out and train seniors in New York? And that's what he did. And he trained thousands of seniors how to turn the device on, how to interact. And so he was pulling people out of their state of loneliness from a compassionate understanding of what his grandmother was going through to actually doing something for his grandmother. He then scaled it. And I'm very, very proud of him. And I met him, a number of years ago when I had written an article about loneliness. And so that story resonates with me, because it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter if, for the first 15 years of your life, you might not have understood the definition of compassion. What really matters is compassion can be taught. And he's a great example of that happening, at 15, 16 years old.
While we do have different starting points in regards to how we engage with our fellow man, meaning that, because of my upbringing and my personality and the way I'm wired, maybe I can engage faster. It just comes easy for me, and for others, it doesn't. But I would dare to say every single one of the skills that you're talking about are really learned skills. I mean, we don't come out, into the world out of the womb, with, the skill set.
Yet some people think you do. And, I'm with you. I do not believe You are born with, and it's funny, I often use the comparison. Some people say, well, you're a natural born leader. And I'll say that's rubbish. Would you go out on the street and pick somebody to do a root canal on you? No, a dentist has to go through training, and you go to somebody that's done, thousands of root canal. And the same thing with leadership. It is a skill that you develop, and the same thing with compassion. I do think, though, and I write about this in my first book, I do think that there are moments in your life where you have been knocked down. And, for me, it was my hearing loss. For me, it was the 9/11. I was supposed to be on that plane that hit the second tower, but my two friends and their 3-year-old got on the plane and lost their lives. And I think that those events in my life triggered my understanding of I could go down the path of anger, I could go down the path of being mean, or I can choose the path of doing good. And so I do think that you have to have an event in your life. It doesn't have to be as severe as I just explained, but I do think you have to have an event in your life where you begin to recognize that kindness and compassion are currencies that can help you achieve your objectives in life.
Well, so for me, when you start talking about, changes and adjustments and skills and all of that, you start looking at traditional organizations, you start looking at traditional methods of leading. And you say that we actually have to look at probably doing an overhaul to a lot of the key positions in organizations. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, listen, when I was writing the book, it was before the pandemic and it continued into the pandemic. Quite honestly, the pandemic has created a whole new perspective of what employees want. We hear a lot about the Great Resignation. I think there's, numerous, definitions that get applied to it. But I do think the common denominator there is that people want more. And the paycheck is table stakes. I mean, let's be honest. We all work because we want to get a paycheck. But employees want to know that their leaders have their back. They want to know that leaders are committed to their being the best that they can be. They want to know that their leaders care about the greater causes that are outside the employer's office. And so a lot has changed. And I think, we're seeing it unfold before our very eyes. I'm just amazed at the input of young people. Let me give you a great example. I hired a 23-year-old, wonderful project manager last year to work in our foundation. I'm going to be honest with you. Normally, I would have said, okay, she just graduated from college. She's got to kind of work her way through the ranks. That would have been the biggest mistake. I don't think that Catherine would have stayed with me. And not only that, her input, her ideas. Now, I had to change my perspective. In fact, the survey is very interesting. Those at my level now who have left and who are CEOs have come to the recognition that that's what's needed in the organization. Middle managers are still struggling with it. However, I do think if they're going to attract employees, if they're going to keep employees for the long term, that giving a pay raise is not going to do it. There's got to be more of a fulfillment in that organization. And, it's not difficult. In fact, one thing I failed to mention, and I need to mention this, is that there's rewards for you. You go home feeling better. You go home feeling more fulfilled. You go home not feeling that this was all about just profit. You go home feeling like you made a difference. And I think that when I look at my career, the times when I really did practice compassionate leadership and the times that I failed and I had to call the person the next day and apologize, let me tell you, I wallowed through that, all night, as opposed to when I did the right compassionate, approach, I felt better at night. So I think it's healthier for you. And I think it's going to be healthier in terms of the way you perform in the organization.
Well, then the other piece is, talking about applying and making some of those changes. And you talk about 5 compassionate driven keys to building community, at work. And goodness to say, more of us are remote than ever before in regards to an overall workforce. So, what are these 5 keys? Because building this community has become, you talk about table stakes. It's table stakes.
Yeah, and let me give you a few of the keys, that we talk about. You have to make sure your message is being heard. And you alluded to it earlier. And you can't take for granted that because you're speaking once in the organization that it's going to be trickling down. And so, it may sound simple. And if you're counting on managers to effectively convey that message, I think you're making a mistake. And I always said I need 20% of the total employee population to be ambassadors. So create ambassadors in your organization that are not just, managers. Bruce Broussard, the CEO of Humana, when we interviewed him, I love what he said. Don't be afraid to say it again and again and again. You must be repetitive and you must check and balance what's happening. The other is, the keys is you have to pair your words with your actions. If in fact the organization is hearing you say one thing and you're doing another, that's just not going, to fly. And I think that is now the younger people are not going to tolerate it. I love my nieces and nephews call me out on a lot of things. And I love that. I never would have done that growing up, to my aunts and uncles. But you know what? The times have changed. And I do think, again, going back to, Bruce Broussard, he, gave another quote. You've got to be an example of it yourself. There's another line I like in the book, and it was by another leader, is that you rent your title. You own your dignity. And the title should mean nothing, but too many leaders strive for that chief operating officer or CEO title, and then they think that they've been anointed the king or queen. You rent your title. You own your dignity. And I always ask myself, what do I want my legacy? And I love the fact that, you raised that today. I always say to my, direct reports, what do you want your legacy, to be? And so your goal should be to align your words with your action. And the other, I would say key is to, you've got to practice compassion. And I practice it at home because if you think that what you do in the workplace is not what you do at home, you're wrong. You're bringing the same behaviors from your home to your workplace. And so, if you really want to improve, I always would ask my partner, tell me not what I'm doing well. Tell me, when you listen to a conversation like I'm having with you right now, tell me what I did wrong. And a leader should ask the question to which they're not afraid to receive the answer. And so don't ask, did I do good? Ask, what could I have done better? And don't be afraid to get the answer that you may not necessarily like at the moment, yet it can be instrumental in how you improve.
Well, and based on that, this may be why you introduced us to a new word in the book. So what is collaboration? Well,
it's very, very funny because I kind of pulled that word out of my hearing aid a number of years ago. I was on a panel discussion at Harvard, and I was listening to everyone talk about innovation. And I just, don't ask me where I got the word out, but I said, it is no longer about innovation. It is about integration. And I said, in fact, it's about collaboration. We have to still innovate and we have to collaborate at the same time. The higher our collaborative IQ, the more you will get done in a company. And so collaboration is bringing innovation and integration. Let me give you an example. When I launched my first company, my second company back in 2008, I came up with this idea about, can we disseminate information to physicians in a similar fashion that Facebook disseminates it? Well, I had an idea. I then went out and acquired one company because they had a solution that I didn't have. And then I acquired a second company. They had a solution that the first two companies did not have. And so I was willing to collaborate. But my innovation, I came up with the idea, but bringing it together involved me collaborating with other people. And I think if we're going to address some of the thorniest issues that are before us, we're going to have to collaborate more. And it's not all about innovation. Too many people want to be known as innovators, and very few care to be known as integrators. The two of them have to work together. And when you look at compassionate leadership, you have to collaborate in the organization to deliver on compassion.
As you're saying that, it kind of reminds me of I'm talking about one of those myths associated with innovation, and that's thinking that innovation is actually generated due to isolation, and that's not the case. All right. So when I start looking at, you got the book, you have the retirement, you have the not-for-profit efforts and works. So I start thinking, what does Donato J. Tramuto, really have as one of his primary goals right now? Can you share that with us?
Yeah, I think it's very simple, is to create a movement around compassion, that this is not just about a book. If I can help leaders understand the notion that compassion can deliver better results for them, then I will have made my mark. I look at my life now by how many summers I have left. I think I have 20 summers left. And I don't want to be known as just a successful businessman, a philanthropist, an activist. I want to be known that I was able to help individuals disseminate this notion that compassion can lead to better results. I kind of wish when I was starting out, I was telling somebody this yesterday, I kind of wish that I had a Donato around me when I first started out. And I hope that that's what people will say, is that he took the time. Quite frankly, Jim, I don't have to do this. I could just, go to my home in, Italy and sit back and relax and, but to me, it's not about what you did yesterday. It's about what you do today and tomorrow. And if I can leave that impression on a few individuals, then I think I will leave this world 20 summers from now, if that's, what happens, feeling that I made a difference.
And the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. All right. Here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, Donato, the Hump Day Hoedown is the part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Donald J. Tramuto, are you ready to hoe down?
Yes.
All right. So what is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
Myself.
What is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
Show yourself compassion.
And what do you feel is one of your best tools that helps you lead in business or life?
My connection to people.
And what would be one book you could recommend to our Legion? And it could be from any genre.
The 7-Story Mountain. It's not necessarily a business book, but it's a book about how you can develop your skills to be a better person.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find links to that and other bonus information from today's show by going to fastleader.net and just doing a very simple search on Donato. Okay, Donato, this is my last Hump Day Hoedown question. Imagine you were given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25, and you can take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you, but you can't take it all. You can only choose one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why?
My ability to develop relationships.
Why?
Because I think that without people and without the ability to have deep connections, you really can't get much done.
Donato, I had a great time chatting with you today. Can you please share with the Fast Leader Legion how they can connect with you?
Please connect with me on donato.tramuto.com.
Donato J. Tramuto, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and helping us all get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.